Hi everyone! Today I'm making some cookies from this book by Lena Tabori. It's part of her Little Big Book series. This is the Little Big Book of Chills and Thrills. It's a Halloween-y themed book with recipes and stories and stuff. It's really cute. So we're going to be making gingerbread ghosts, which ironically have no ginger in them, but we're going to try it anyway. And right now I'm just gathering some of the things we'll need at first, like mixing bowls, measuring cups, spatulas, a spoon, and now for the first ingredient we're going to need the Crisco. I'm doing a half batch, so half of what the recipe calls for. The recipe calls for 2/3 cup of shortening. I'm just doing 1/3 for a half batch. So I'm scooping it and then pushing it down to make it flush, and then adding it to the mixing bowl to use for later, making sure I get all of the shortening from on the outsides and on the spoon. I suppose you could use butter or lard, but I wanted to stay as close to the original recipe as possible just to see how it turns out. Next up we need brown sugar. It's going to be, so the recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of light brown sugar. Now 3/4 of a cup is 12 tablespoons, so I'm doing 6 for the half batch. So 6 tablespoons of light brown sugar packed, because that's how you usually do brown sugar. And then for the molasses, it calls for 1 tablespoon, so I'm just going to make a tablespoon cavern and pour the molasses into the brown sugar, just so I don't have to mess with all the stickiness of wiping it out of the measuring spoon. So we're going to put those away, and I'm going to wash my hands because I did get a little bit of molasses on there. And next it calls for lemon zest. Now you'll notice that as I'm zesting on the microplane that I zest the whole lemon, and I forgot that I was doing a half batch. The recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of grated lemon rind, and I ended up making like 2 tablespoons. For some reason I had a whole total brain blip, so I'll fix it later. Don't worry. It's not going to be lemon bread cookies. It would be weird with the spices, but I digress. Next, we need some flour, all-purpose flour, and we're going to do 1 1/4 cups of flour. Now this is a little bit more than the recipe calls for. It actually, the full batch recipe calls for 2 1/4, but I didn't feel like doing the math, so I just did 1 1/4. So here's where I realized my mistake with the lemon zest. So then I fix it. I put most of it back into a Ziploc bag that I'll just use for later, and then measure out to make sure that it's a teaspoon rather than 2 tablespoons. Always double check. So it also calls for 1 1/2 tablespoons of boiled then cooled water. It's a very specific ingredient, so we're going to set that aside to let it cool after having been boiled. Next you need a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then 3/4 of a teaspoon of cloves. So I'm taking 1/2 a teaspoon and then a 1/4 teaspoon. And like I said, there's no ginger, so these spices are, I suppose, meant to mimic ginger. I don't know why you wouldn't use ginger, but that's fine. And then I also used a 1/2 teaspoon of ground cardamom. And then I'm going to mix those together to distribute the spices and baking soda. Next, we're going to combine the brown sugar, molasses, and Crisco Now if I had to do this all over again, I would have added the water first to the brown sugar and molasses and then incorporated the Crisco, because as you can see, it's a lot of mixing. And then when you add the water, it makes it even more difficult. So here I am adding the water. Like I said, I would have done water, brown sugar, molasses, combined those together, and then added that to the Crisco. I think it would make it a little bit easier than trying to incorporate the water into all the other ingredients after the fact. Because as you can see, it took a lot of work to get that water in there. Now we're going to add that to our flour. Make sure we get everything in there. And now for putting everything away and combining and incorporating the wet with the dry. Now, this was very difficult, and this is where I'm not sure where they got this recipe, because it was very difficult to bring together. It doesn't have ginger, and you'll see in a moment that I added another teaspoon of water to it because it was very dry and it wasn't coming together at all. And I know I added a little bit more flour than needed, but it was extremely dry, so I don't think that was what the problem was. But, you know, persistence, perseverance. I wanted to see if we could make it work. So I'm trying to bring it together. It's very crumbly. As you can see, I'm having a rough time with it. So here's where I add the extra teaspoon of water, just to see if that would bring it together a bit more, and it did. I was finally able to make it come together and form a dough ball. Now that that's come together, we're going to put it in the refrigerator. First we're going to wrap it in some plastic wrap. The recipe says to chill for at least 30 minutes. I let it chill for an hour, hoping that the moisture would redistribute and make it a little bit more of a preferable dough texture. So we're just going to wrap it up in a tight little bundle, flatten it out just a bit, and put it in the fridge. And time for cleanup number 1, just putting all the stuff away. I'm not sure if you guys like to see this part. If you'd rather I just didn't show you my cleanup. I try to speed it up, but if you'd rather you didn't see it at all, just let me know. Alright, so while the dough is chilling, I'm going to pick out some cookie cutters. I have this collection of plastic cookie cutters that I've had forever, and I'm looking at all the different colors or different holidays and different events. You know, like I think this is a Halloween one where I find the ghost that they have. You know, it's kind of like a pointy-headed ghost with 2 kind of stubby arms hanging out. And then I don't really like it because it's also too big for the half batch that I made. I wanted something a little bit smaller. And then I noticed there's a fish that might be made into a ghost. But that's not really what I wanted either. And then I came across the Valentine hearts right here and thought maybe they would be good. So I got a medium-sized heart and then a scalloped heart. So I was thinking the scalloped part might be like, you know, the frilly bottom of a ghost's no feet, you know, the bottom of a ghost where he's kind of fluttery. So I was going to try that later. And here I'm just making sure there's nothing else that I could make work, since I don't have the exact cookie cutter that I would like for the little ghosties. But now, so I'm putting the fish away, I don't want that. And I'm putting the big ghost away because it's too big for the little bit of dough that I have. And then keeping the Valentine hearts out just in case I want to use any others. So now it's time to prep to get ready to roll the dough. I've got my rolling pin, some flour, and then a half sheet pan with some parchment paper. I'm going to flour the surface a bit. And then we're going to bring out the dough. So like I said, I chilled it for an hour hoping that it would hydrate a bit better. It ended up not being very hydrated. It's a very, very dry dough, especially now that I have to add more flour to roll it out. So I decided to get a cup of water and dip my fingers in it as I went to figure out, you know, to get to the good consistency that you want with a dough, you know, not too wet, but also be able to hold together. And I sped this part up because, you know, it did take a while to get enough moisture in there to make it pliable, but I did end up being able to get it to a good rolling and cutting texture. So here we go, getting it to roll out pretty well. Trying to make it fairly thin. It's about, I don't know, I'd say 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm using the medium straight heart cutter to cut out the initial shape. And then my plan is to cut the hearts in half and see if I can't make little ghosties out of them. So for a trial run, I'll cut the first one in half lightly, not to cut the counter, you know. Use the spatula to get it off, and then I tried to use the scalloped edge of the cookie cutter to see if I could make the little ruffly edges at the bottom, but it didn't really work out with the shape. So I decided against it. Wasn't happy with it. So I just put those bits back and continued with the rest of them, and then I'll tell you what I did for the actual shape. And I think they came out pretty cute for not having an actual cutter. So I cut the hearts in half, and then what I'm going to do after I pick up one of the halves is I'll soften the edge of the large part of the heart, half heart, and then I'm going to sort of carefully twist the end up to make it a little bit of a curve, so like, you know, a little bit of a ghosty curve bottom. I'll show you later when you see the cookies. And here I'm going to speed up the rest of it so that you don't have to sit through my shaping every single one of them in real time. proceeded to do what you do with cookies. You roll them out, cut them out, use the excess to make some more until you have the very tail end, and then I'll show you what I did with that. So here's the last of the hearts, because there's not quite enough dough. So I'm just going to make a round shape. Cut that in half and round the edges so that it's fairly uniform. I was thinking I might also be able to make those into little ghosties, but I ended up not doing so. Okay, there are the shapes. And into the oven they go. And then clean up number 2. I don't know about you, but I sometimes like watching people clean things up. It tickles my possible ADHD brain. Okay, turning off the timer. So the first bake I put them in for 10 minutes and they came out pretty well. So I let them sit for a minute while I get everything. I got a cooling rack and a paper towel and an offset spatula. And here I'm just moving the cookies over to the cooling sheet. Now, I let them cool completely, and after this I made just a simple royal icing with meringue powder and water. And then I just lined and filled them with white royal icing, and then I dipped a toothpick into some blue food coloring and did little swirlies for the eyes and mouth. I didn't do anything kind of crazy, but they turned out pretty cute and pretty tasty. Overall, with this basic recipe, I would give it a 6 out of 10. I'll give you my recipe that I think, you know, with like the method and what should be in it to make it a little better. And I hope you try it. Enjoy and have a happy Halloween.